In this episode, we talk about 19-year-old Divya Deshmukh becoming the FIDE Women's World Cup champion. We also talk about Tata Consultancy Services announcing that it will lay off 2% of its workforce. But first, we talk about the new developments between India and Maldives. Hi, I am Niharika Nanda, and you are listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. After President Mohammad Muiz came to power in November 2023, he signalled very clearly that Maldives should politically distance itself from India. This was a sharp contrast to his predecessors, whose approach towards India had been far more friendly. In fact, Muiz rose to power on an India Out campaign, and during his first year as president, he introduced several policies in line with that stance, including asking India to withdraw its troops from the country. But now, nearly 2 years later, he seems to have taken a U-turn. That shift was clearly visible during Prime Minister Narendra Modi's 2-day visit to the Maldives last week, where he attended the country's Independence Day celebrations. During this visit, several economic agreements were signed, projects were inaugurated, and India also announced a credit line of Rs 4,850 crore. To talk about this reset and what it means for both countries, my colleague Shashank Bhargava speaks to the Indian Express's Divya A in this segment.
Divya, before we talk about PM Modi's latest visit, can you briefly talk about what strategic significance Maldives has for India?
Maldives is very important for India simply because of its geography, location. It's India's close neighbor. It's just about 300 nautical miles from India's mainland. So it is key component of India's neighborhood and, the India's neighborhood first policy. And also a strong relationship with Maldives is important because it in a way helps counter China's growing influence in the Indian Ocean region. So in that sense, in fact, India has been building bridges and focusing on all the countries and smaller island nations in the neighborhood as a counterbalance to China, I would say. It is also India's key partner in trade, major trading partner. In terms of volumes, it may not be so much, but it is among the major trading partner. There is also a lot of people-to-people ties and tourism ties. There are also cultural and ethnic linguistic ties. So a good relationship between Maldives and India is important in many ways for New Delhi and Male both.
And when talking about China, India has in the past expressed concerns about a large number of Chinese vessels being present around Maldives. And New Delhi, for instance, has told Male that it should exercise caution while granting them permission. And what's also important to consider is that President Muiz, he's actually seen as being much closer to China than his predecessor. And he actually came to power on an India Out campaign, right? So can you talk about his government's stance regarding India and what we have seen since he's come to power?
Yeah, as far as President Mohammad Muiz is concerned, so when he started his election campaign in late 2023, it was basically on the back of an India Out policy, which indirectly meant India out and, China in. And when he became the president, he also made his first official visit to China, whereas traditionally Maldivian presidents would make their first official visit to India. So that was not just a clear signal, it was a clear statement in many ways, which showed his proximity to China and his indifference or kind of maintaining distances with India. So things became complicated. In fact, as soon as he returned from China, there was a call for India to withdraw troops from the Maldives. Then in the same month, in January of 2024, we would remember Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Lakshadweep. So one innocuous picture that Prime Ministers posted from there created a bit of a flutter in Maldives with the senior minister saying that, Indians should not be visiting here and all of that. And so everything went downhill after that. And what we are seeing now, 20 months later, is a complete reset. And it hasn't happened overnight. It has happened through a sustained effort on part of both sides in the last 1 year or more.
Right, and you mentioned the controversy involving PM Modi's Lakshadweep visit, and it had started after social media users in Maldives, they had started making offensive and derogatory remarks against Indians, and then ministers in Moise's cabinet repeated those remarks, some of which were directed against PM Modi as well, and later at least three of those ministers were sacked. But, when we talk about this government's decision to ask India to withdraw its troops, that was, seen as a big deal because in terms of defense, like you said, Maldives has been an important strategic partner. Almost 70% of Maldives defense training is actually done by India. So that was seen as a friction point. But, now what we are seeing is a bit of reset. So tell us what all is happening right now and what were the highlights of PM Modi's 2-day visit there?
See, you see, from India out, now it has come to Indian Prime Minister being the guest of honor at their Independence Day celebration. So from India out, it's a bit of a red carpet for India. So it's a complete reset. From the time you see when Indian tourism and tourists were discouraged, they were asked to not come and all of that. Now we had President Moise making a statement that, India is one of the major countries that helps Maldives with tourism, and with Prime Minister Modi's visit, it is going to increase a lot. In fact, the two leaders also discussed starting direct flights because as of now, one has to, land in Maldives, you have to take a flight from like a smaller flight from one of the southern cities like Chennai or Kochi. So there were talks about starting more direct flights from the bigger cities of India. So all that is now part of the conversations, which is a complete turnaround, to say the least, from what we saw early last year. From India out to red carpet is what it is, effectively.
And talk about some of the things that were initiated during the visit. What were some of the important announcements?
See, we say that the visit signifies a total reset, but it is also, New Delhi has made a lot of sustained efforts, including a lot of assistance to the island nation to deal with its economic situation. And maybe that has been a factor, arguably, which has helped bring the relations back on track. So in that sense, India extended a credit line worth almost rupees 5,000 crore to Maldives, which was announced during this trip. There is also a lot of other projects that India helps with, including defense training, social sector. So India also is kind of, helping them implement, digital payment solution on a large scale. There are some road and drainage system projects that India helped with. There are some community development projects, some heavy vehicles that were given to the Maldivian Ministry of Defense. There is also a pact on the cooperation in the sector of fisheries and aquaculture. So as a neighbor, there was a lot of cooperation and help that India extended and support that India extended to Maldives.
And Divya, especially considering we are seeing this kind of U-turn, anything in particular that stands out in the recent statements that have been made by these two leaders?
Yeah, so how it started, how the warmth started, how the breakthrough came when Prime Minister Modi was sworn in for his third term in the middle of last year. So among all the leaders from the neighborhood who were invited, President Moise was also invited, and he came down for the swearing-in ceremony. And soon after, he also made an official visit to India in October last year. So that visit was the beginning of, what we see now. Over these last few months, the momentum has been maintained at political level. And now it came to a point last week where we see that the two leaders showed a lot of warmth for each other, and Prime Minister Modi saying that "Mausam kaisa bhi ho, our friendship will remain clear and warm," which is to say that India is Maldives' all-weather friend. And President Moise is also saying that this is a defining visit that sets a clear path for the future of, bilateral relations, which is a way to say that whatever may happen, the ties are going to be now on a secure path, and the kind of things that we saw in the past are not going to become issues in the coming months, so to speak. So those are the kind of things that we see. And Prime Minister Modi also held a lot of meetings across the political political spectrum in Maldives with the opposition leaders, and I think across political parties in Maldives there was a huge support for taking the bilateral ties forward. So we see that things are on a good track, so to speak, in that sense.
And now, shifting focus from Maldives, we turn to the world of chess. On Monday, 19-year-old Divya Deshmukh defeated veteran Koneru Humpy, the most dominant force in Indian women's chess for over 2 decades, to win the FIDE Women's World Cup final. The win also makes Divya eligible to become only the 4th Indian woman to earn the Grandmaster title. A remarkable feat, especially since she did not have a single Grandmaster norm before the tournament. Her final against Humpy also marked a turning point, signaling that Indian players are now ready to lead women's chess after decades of dominance by Chinese and Russian players. To know about this win and what it means for Indian chess, we are joined by Amit Kamath, the co-host of the Express Sports podcast. Amit, begin by telling us a little bit about Divya. What has her career trajectory been like so far?
Yeah, I think if you want to trace her rise, the easiest metric or the easiest way to look at it is just last year, sometime around June, I believe, she was playing in the World Junior Championships and she won the title. So she became the World Junior Champion. In the span of around 13 months, she has already become a World Cup winner. The FIDE Women's World Cup is the second most prestigious tournament in women's chess after the Women's World Championship. But technically, it's the most tricky, treacherous, grueling tournament to compete in because it takes place over a span of 24 days. Like, unlike the World Championship, you don't just play one opponent over and over again. You play, I think, 6 rounds, 7 rounds. And these are all mini matches. These are all best of 2 matches that you play in classical format. If you don't win, then you have to again play tie breaks, which is what happened in the final. Like, she had to outlast a veteran like Koneru Humpy via the tie breaks in the final, right? So this is what makes winning the World Cup really tricky. Even somebody like a Magnus Carlsen only won his first World Cup in 2023 where he beat Nanda. So that kind of gives you a sense of how difficult it is to win a World Cup.
And talk about what do her contemporaries have to say about her? What makes her stand out from the other players right now?
I've been speaking to a lot of these people in Indian chess, right? All of them are accomplished players themselves who've now moved into coaching and things like that. And everybody, when they talk about Divya, there are a couple of themes that come across. One is her aggression on the board. Second is, her emotional maturity when she's on the board. Like, she's not somebody who's as I mentioned, she's not overawed, but she's a very emotionally mature person for somebody who's just 19, right? She's not somebody like, when you look at her away from a chess game, she's somebody who's bubbly, she's very goofy, she doesn't take herself too seriously. You will see her apologizing to chess pieces. She's goofy, she'll joke about things. Her interviews are like a breath of fresh air. And you put her on the board and she's like, then her game face switches on, right? So she's that kind of a mature person. But some of the things that the other grandmasters and these guys told me, like I was talking to Abhijit Kunte, who was the captain of the Indian women's team when they won gold last year at the Olympiad. He was like, when I told Divya that, you are in form and we need you to play all 11 games at the Olympiad without missing a beat, without doing like a double take, Divya was like, okay, sure, I'll do it. And playing 11 games is something that not a lot of players do at an Olympiad. So this is rare. These kind of qualities are what make her different than other players in a sense.
Right. And Amit, can you tell us about this match between her and Koneru Humpy? Talk about how Divya managed to defeat Humpy, who clearly has been a giant in Indian chess.
Right. So what is interesting is in the battle between Koneru Humpy and Divya, we had like 2 complete contrasts, right? You had somebody who's 38, who's, kind of eased off on her career because of childbirth, because of family taking over. And then she is now starting to make a resurgence in the sport, where last year she became a world rapid champion. This is Humpy, by the way. And this year she's already won a Women's Grand Prix event. And now we are seeing her reach the final. So she's somebody who has a lot of experience under her belt. She knows a lot about competing in these type of high pressure tournaments, right? And then you had somebody like a Divya who was playing in her first event of sorts, like first real big ticket event. She goes all the way. She's 19. She's not even a grandmaster. So that is what makes it kind of significant. And to be fair, Divya has become a grandmaster without actually getting the 3 norms that are mandatory to become a grandmaster. It's almost like that Saap CD wala thing where you get a ladder and then you just quickly rise without having to go through all the squares. She's just had that ladder. But I mean, it's not to suggest that she's taken like a shortcut, because this was, I think, the most treacherous shortcut you could take to become a grandmaster. So yeah, she had to do that. And beating Humpy the final with Humpy was something that was like really tricky, because the final was held over 3 days. The first game was played in the classical format, which ended in a draw. In that match, we saw Divya was the one who was trying to, get something out of the match. She was trying to take risks. She was being aggressive, trying to, force Humpy's hand and get an error out of her. In the second game, there was not really too much happening because Humpy was playing with white pieces and she made sure that, everything was quiet on the battlefield. So that also ended in a draw. Then we came back for the third day for the tie breaks, which are played in the rapid format. It's a much faster time control. The first game there also ended in a draw, but the second game was where Divya kind of, so the thing is, this tournament was played over 24 days. So eventually Humpy kind of physically also got exhausted, and we saw that physical exhaustion leading to a few errors on the board in the second game of the tiebreak. And that is when Divya kind of capitalized. That's how she became a grandmaster, a World Cup winner, and also she earned herself a spot in the Women's Candidates tournament.
Amit, you mentioned that Divya didn't follow the usual path of achieving grandmaster norms, but still earned the title by defeating some of the top players in the tournament. Could you tell us who some of those players were?
Right. So she had to beat world number 6 Zhu Jainer from China, who is one of the biggest rising stars in women's chess. She's a grandmaster. Then she had to beat Harika Dronawali in the next round. Again, Harika is a grandmaster. In the next round, the semi-finals, Divya had to beat Tan Zhongyi. Tan Zhongyi is a former women's world champion. And then she ran into the OG trailblazer of Indian women's chess, which was Koneru Humpy, and also outlasted her to become a World Cup winner, right? So by no means was this easy. She started the tournament thinking that she will probably get one grandmaster norm out of the tournament. She ends the tournament by becoming a grandmaster herself.
And Amit, can you also talk about the kind of rise that women have seen in chess, which, like many other sports, has been male-dominated for a very long time?
Right. So I think even now, if you look at it, the headlines in Indian chess also have been dominated to a certain extent by men, because, you have a proper golden generation of sorts coming in men's chess. You have Gukesh, who's at the age of 18 become the youngest ever world champion. You have Pragyananda, who's also doing equally incredible feats. You have Arjun Ergyasi, who's reached 2800 rating, also incredible. So you have these 3 guys who have become the flag bearers of Indian chess. But now, because of players like Divya, women's chess is also starting to stake its rightful position under the spotlight. At the last year's Olympiad, the headlines could have well been about the Indian men's team, or the open team as they call it. But then simultaneously, you also had the women's team kind of winning a gold medal. You had Divya winning the individual gold. You had Vantika Agarwal, who's also right now one of the most promising players in Indian women's chess. She also won a gold medal for her board. So whatever the men had done in the open section, the women also matched. It was a clean sweep of sorts at the Olympiad. And so that was the first indicator we had that the women are also coming up. They are also going to be a force to be reckoned with. And what we've seen at the World Cup is equally amazing. Like, if you looked at the quarterfinals, there were 4 Indian women there as compared to just 3 Chinese women. And that in itself was an indicator that Indian women's, as like the slang goes, apna time aayega, so the time of Indian women's players is finally here.
Right, and what also stood out this time was that the final featured 2 Indian players. And what we are seeing now is that Indian women chess players are ready to challenge China's long-standing dominance.
See, China has been one of the biggest forces to be reckoned with in women's chess, right? And this has been for the last, let's say, 15 years or so, because since Hu Yifan became a women's world champion around 2010, since then, we've had three more women becoming world champion. You had Tan Zhongyi, we had Zhu Wenjun, all of them becoming women's world champions. And in the last 15 years or so, barring maybe two short stints, it's always been a woman from China who's sat on that throne. But if you looked at the FIDE World Cup, which just ended in Batumi, you had two women, Divya and Humpy, fighting for the top prize. And you had two Chinese players, Li Tingzhe and Tan Zhongyi. Both of them were fighting for the third spot, right? And both of them were defeated by, Divya and Humpy on the way to reaching the final. So that was an indicator that, Indian women are now starting to chip away at that great heft that Chinese women enjoyed in women's chess. So 9 women's players from China had come into the tournament trying to win the title. Instead, the best they could reach was the number 3 and number 4 spots, right? So that is also an indicator of how Indian women kind of dominated this tournament.
So Amit, what lies ahead for Divya now? What challenges can she look forward to as a grandmaster?
I think for somebody like a Divya now, what also will have to be baked into her is she's spoken about this herself, she's spoken about trying to balance this aggressive streak that she has with a little bit of pragmatism. Every game can't be pushed till you reach. So, what was really fascinating, the first game that I spoke about when she was playing against Humpy, and Divya was the one who was trying to still challenge, who was still literally trying to squeeze water out of stone. And Vishwanathan Anand was doing commentary at that time for the official broadcast. And he was like, at some point, I think around after move 40, Anand was the one who was like, okay, now this seems to be heading to a draw. And you could see Anand getting a little frustrated in a sense. He was like, okay, what is happening? I don't understand why these guys are still playing, because I can see that it's a draw. And these two guys were not giving each other any quarters. Maybe you could rationalize Divya's thought process by saying that, she had realized that Humpy is playing on her 24th day. She's 38. So she must be more exhausted physically than Divya was. So the effort was to try and exhaust her, to make sure that she spends another additional 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes on the board. So that was clear. But then that pragmatism is something that she will have to get into her. And this is not me saying it. This is what Divya herself has said, that now her bigger challenge is to try and balance this aggressive streak that she has on the board with a little bit of knowing when to fold your cards and knowing when to challenge the opponent.
And in the end, we talk about the TCS layoffs. On Sunday, Tata Consultancy Services, India's largest IT company, announced that it will lay off 2% of its workforce. This decision is likely going to impact mid and senior level employees. The move has stirred anxiety across the tech sector, raising a pressing question. Is the Indian IT industry now adopting the aggressive layoff culture seen by the tech giants in the US? In his recent piece, the Indian Express's George Matthew writes that for decades, Indian IT firms were seen as stable and secure employers. But that reputation is now fading. Companies like TCS, Infosys, Wipro, and HCL Technologies had nearly doubled their headcount over the past decade, especially after the pandemic. However, with demands now softening and pressure on margins, they appear to be reversing that growth story. He points out that TCS alone grew from over 3 lakh employees in financial year of 2015 to over 6 lakh by June 2025. The company also diversified aggressively, employing people from over 150 nationalities and with women now making over 35% of its workforce. But since the financial year of 2023, it has slowed down hiring and seen a rise in employee exit. Infosys followed a similar trajectory, growing at 84% over 10 years. Its headcount peaked at around 3.5 lakh in the financial year of 2023, but has since dipped slightly. The company continues to hire fresh graduates, though at a slower pace, and is realigning to meet shifting client needs and automation trends. Meanwhile, Wipro also grew by 64% over the past decade, peaking at nearly 2.5 lakh employees in the financial year of 2023 before settling at around 2.3 lakh. It also boosted diversity while adapting to digital shifts. Now, while unveiling the company's results earlier this month, TCS CEO and MD K. Krithivasan said that continued global microeconomic and geopolitical uncertainties have led to a demand contraction. So Matthew writes that with layoffs beginning at the very top of the industry, there's a growing concern that the era of lifetime job security in Indian IT may be coming to an end. And for a sector long viewed as a safe haven for India's middle class, the message now seems clear. No one is immune. You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's episode was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar and produced by Shashank Bhargava and me, Niharika Nanda. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Podcast and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.